myself now. Got the recording rolling. Okay. And I'll hand over here. I'll do the share of screen. Hang on a second. So I'm turning sideways now as I look at my actually, it's rather good. I can actually look at the miniature here, which I haven't ever done before, but it's a useful thing PowerPoint does to give you, as a presenter, a miniature, and you can present on a larger screen. So I can see you guys. I'll actually put you up here so I can see more faces. Hang on a second. Drag it out. So hopefully some others will turn up, but you never know. There's a view of 9 of you. And it's making this a bit smaller as well. Okay, so I posed the question last week and Tony blew the answer. Where did economics go wrong? And I liked some of the suggestions people made about Milton Friedman, obviously, for methodology and money. But there's so many choices. The marginalists themselves. But my thinking was, and it's taking me a long time to reach this conclusion, obviously, is that there's got to be the reason that all these stupid assumptions keep on being made and stupid compromises and terrible methodological choices goes right back to something incredibly fundamental. And I found it when I read the Physiocrats. And this is way back in, I think I started reading them in about 1996 or 7, I think, when I was doing writing my course on the history of economic thought at the University of Western Sydney. And when you read The Wealth of Nations, you get, this is the opening sentence: the annual labour of every nation is the fund which originally supplies it with all the necessaries and conveniences of life. Okay? And my point was, and because we've actually discussed this a bit in the previous, I won't repeat myself here. The problem is obvious when you compare it to Richard Cantillon's essay on economic theory, written just 21 years beforehand. Land is the source of matter from which all wealth is drawn. Man's labour provides the form for its production, and wealth in itself is nothing but the food, conveniences, and pleasures of life. Now, apart from the obvious plagiarism there, you can see the overlaps there are amazing. Convenience and pleasures of life in Cantillon, necessaries and convenience of life in Smith. Very, very similar. But the big difference is that Smith substitutes labour for land. Have land as the source or matter, annual labour is the fund. Okay? I really do find these contrasts quite remarkable. And there's no way to find out whether Smith, in a sense, stole the opening from Cantillon, because before he died, Smith insisted that all his papers get burned. So he lost the potential historical record of how he developed those ideas. But to me, it's bleedingly obvious he was setting his book in juxtaposition to Cantillon and saying labour rather than land. Now, the problem that I see with the substitution is the Physiocrats were ahead of the times, because what they saw as a source of wealth, or what they call the pure gift of nature, and that is that wealth, the absolutely irrefutable basis of wealth is not what we do, it's what we find. Okay? It's humans find food, we find everything all the other animals find. We also find coal, which is where the real transformation came from. But we didn't make any of this stuff. It's there for us to hunt. We were hunters and gatherers, now we're hunters, gatherers, and miners. And what we take, we get a free gift of nature, and we then use that to transform our own lifestyle. And Turgot, who's another one of the Physiocrats, and writing very, very much the same time as Smith himself, was put this better than Cantillon did. Nature grants the physical fertility of the soil. Okay, and that is the fundamental determinant of how much you get back as a farmer. As soon as the labour of the husband produces more than his wants, and a lot of that labour is directed not towards generating what you take out of the farm, but out of making sure that other animals don't get it. You keep away the insects, keep away the birds. Okay, what you're doing is reserving that stuff for yourself. And that was it, because it was you're putting a bit of animal dung back into the soil, but the animals did themselves that unintentionally anyway. You're just concentrating it. So back at this stage, and Turgot was quite explicit about this, it's not the labour of the farmer that generates the value. The ultimate source of the value is the productivity of the soil itself, which is a free gift of nature. And then with that, you can then command the output of other elements of society. So this puts the perspective that wealth originates from nature outside the economy. Whereas Smith says the source of wealth is labor and the growth of wealth is the division of labor, and all this is inside the economy. Now, as soon as you've made that mistake, everything else follows, in my opinion. That's where I base it from. And the physics are fundamentally true because they're consistent with the laws of thermodynamics. Okay, what we really learned about a century after the physicocrats were writing. That's why I see them as well ahead of their times. So the laws of thermodynamics. Just give me a help up here. Any engineers in the room or scientists? Hand up if you are. Yeah, I'm safe. Okay, I'm by no means an expert on these laws, and I've seen friends of mine who are physicists say that if you think you understand the laws of thermodynamics, you don't understand the laws of thermodynamics, which is a bit like the attitude to quantum mechanics. It's so effing difficult that if you are arrogant enough to think you know it, you probably don't. But I'm willing to say I don't understand it properly, but I know they exist and I know they have to be conformed to. And so they're laws which were developed originally from empirical observation. This was Boltzmann back in the 19th century, and it led to a concept called entropy. And entropy, I always get, is it high entropy or low entropy? I always start off the wrong way around. But the law that entropy always increases, which means disorder increases over time, holds the supreme position amongst the laws of nature. And this is Sir Arthur Eddington, who was the popularizer of Einstein's theory of general relativity. And in fact, he was also the scientist who empirically verified the general theory of relativity by going out to observe the transit of a star behind the sun and then measuring the length of time for which you could see that star as the sun moved in front of it. And according to Einstein's theory, there should have been an 8-minute, I think it was, or 8-second change, extension of being able to see the star over and above what was possible from straight line of sight, which is Newtonian. And that's what he confirmed. That's what he found. So he's both a great scientist and a great popularizer of science. And here he's writing a popular book for the public back in the 1930s, I think, saying, if somebody points out that your pet theory is in disagreement with Maxwell's equations, and of course Planck's theory was, well, so much the worse for Maxwell's equations. If your theory is contradicted by observations, well, experimenters botch things sometimes. But if your theory is found to be against the second law of thermodynamics, I can give you no hope. There is nothing for it but to collapse in deepest humiliation. And that, I'm afraid, is where Smith began. An economist, without knowing this, without having the prescient wisdom of the physiocrats to help them out, didn't realize that what they were building with the theory of economics, which is inconsistent with the fundamental laws of the universe. And then from that, I think everything else has flowed. So most social scientists don't know this. I'm lucky. I wanted to be a physicist, like a lot of economists do, but I had 6 years of lousy science teachers, and after 6 years of that, my interest declined, and I became fascinated by a good teacher in economics, which is why I went that way. But I read a lot of the material, and I have friends who are physicists and engineers, so I don't have the usual isolation that a lot of economists have when they don't know other fields. But there's a wonderful writer called C.P. Snow, who's both a novelist and a physicist, again, writing at much the same time as Eddington. And I think he was probably potentially a contemporary of Keynes. He says, a good many times I've been present at gatherings of people who, by the standards of traditional culture, are thought highly educated and have with considerable gusto been expressing their incredulity at the illiteracy of scientists. And he's a scientist as well as a playwright. Once or twice I've been provoked and have asked the company how many of them could describe the second law of thermodynamics. The response was cold. It was also negative. Yet I was asking someone something which is about the scientific equivalent of have you read a work of Shakespeare? This huge division between scientists and social scientists is where a lot of this comes from. So I'm not an expert, but I'm aware they exist. And the point I want to make here is that we have to have a theory that's consistent with it if we're going to have a decent theory. The first law is known as law of conservation. It used to be called the law of conservation of energy. After Einstein became the law of conservation of energy and matter. Energy can be neither created nor destroyed. So the amount that exists in the universe is there. We can change its form, we can't change the amount. The second law I give the nickname of degeneration. That's probably because I'm a fan of the Who. Anybody know the song? They're talking about my degeneration. Back. I hope I die before I get old. I'll have to send. I'll link it to you so you have those who haven't heard it can have a listen. It's a great song. But the things degenerate. Entropy rises. Order in a closed system degrades over time. And the third law I also give a nickname to of degradation, and that is work cannot be 100% efficient. Waste is inevitable. Now you compare that to how neoclassicals talk about perfect this and perfect that. Intellectually, they're working as if you can have zero waste. That's the ideal. And they believe you can get there. And they believe they can reform the economy to make us get there. And they're completely, absolutely wrong. And if we had this understanding built into economics from the beginning, we would never have got this nonsense in the first place, which is why I take my original sin of economics right back to Adam Smith. And I love how the old beat poet Allen Ginsberg. Anybody know Allen Ginsberg? Oh, come on. Oh,
No,
thank
of
you,
him.
Alvin. Okay. I'm making him feel very old here. A bunch of our grey hairs, and obviously the oldest amongst you, except possibly Alvin. The beat poet in the 1960s, Allen Ginsberg, put the laws this way. The first law is you can't win. You can't get out more than you put in. The second law is you can't break even. Things degrade over time. And the third is you can't get out of the game because you can't find a place that gets over the waste problem. I think that's a brilliant way of